people often ask me, why are you studying Japanese beauty queens? Particularly because my original study was Japanese feminists of the Meiji period. But why I'm studying Japanese beauty queens of the post-war is because they were seen as models of democracy in Japan. And that might sound funny to people who think of beauty queens as simply models of beauty. But in 1950s Japan, the idea of a beauty queen who could be out on stage, who could be confident, who could smile in public, who could say her name in public, and be willing to travel abroad to the United States to be in international competition, to represent her country, at the time was seen as a significant move forward for Japanese women's rights. Yet thinking about the continuity between the Japanese beauty contests, particularly in the post-war, and the American beauty contest, certain things become immediately apparent. One is the type of events that we associate as typical of beauty pageants, the evening gown, the native costume, and the swimsuit. But if we focus on the evening gown, for example, that's a really interesting symbol. Because what it says for either the Japanese women or the American women or any women coming to Long Beach in the early 50s is that through beauty contest and through this development of poise and confidence and a public persona, you can actually have the possibility of upward mobility. That the evening gown symbolizes going to the ball. It's kind of like Cinderella. And at that ball, you will also find Prince Charming. Like Cinderella stories in the States and Europe and in Japan, the ending, though, is very quick. You get married, you go off with Prince Charming, and you live happily ever after. But what actually you do as a beauty queen in the rest of your life is never stated. A beauty queen is a very temporary moment of youth, a celebration of youth, but one that has to end in marriage and motherhood in order to become successful. Right, so when you're studying the post-war beauty queens and you see democracy so entwined with their success as beauties, it really makes you wonder what happened to democracy. And on the one hand, I admire the beauty queens, I have to say. I mean, they were brave, young women willing to try something very difficult to do, and they were successful. Nevertheless, you can see a contest that's shaping women to be images, but not to talk. They can't complain. So one of the issues often in beauty contests is they have to give a quick answer, and the answer should be thoughtful, but the answer can't be angry. And yet if you look at the broader context of the 1950s, you see lots and lots of angry Japanese women protesting bases, protesting efforts to go back to the old, patriarchal institutions in Japan, protesting the lack of achievement of equality promised by the Constitution, and all of those things are somehow muted by the beauty contest. It's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, what do we learn from studying beauty queens in Japan in the post-war, in the 1950s? First thing you think of, it's fun. It's funny, and we can all feel some way superior to the idea of a beauty contest. It's not something that you feel, like let's say if you were going to a lecture on the Genome Project, I'd wonder, will I understand that? With beauty queens, people feel like, oh, this has got to be fun, it'll be easy. But what's interesting about that is you see the post-war in a really different way. Instead of studying just the Japanese treaties, Japanese self-defense force, how did democracy work in Japan, the LDP, the diet, education, you look at it from a very pop culture way, beauty queens. And yet beauty queens played a significant role in the media. They were a model for Japanese women, but a model that is kind of under the radar because it's considered silly and not important. But a lot of times we find out that real politics and assumptions happens in those places under the radar. It's where people are not suspecting that you have to be critical. And that's when you find lots of fantasies about reinventing yourself, about becoming famous, what it means to be beautiful. I mean, certainly a lot of women didn't think they could actually become a beauty queen, but there's a fantasy about that that's different than having to live your ordinary life with your responsibilities and the things that don't make life so exciting. But that's why I find, in a way, the beauty queens is a different way of looking at the post-war in Japan. Then when you connect it to the United States and these broad contests, then you get into the Cold War politics of containment, of femininity, of rhetoric of the free world that's played out in ways that seem funny, but because they seem funny and innocent, perhaps they're more insidious, make us less critical.